Japan has the lowest rate of heart disease in the entire developed world. Not one of the lowest. And when you sit with that fact for a moment and really think about what it means, especially given that heart disease kills one person in the United States every 36 seconds, it becomes a question worth taking seriously. Now, here's what makes it even more remarkable. It's not genetics. We know this because Japanese people who emigrate to the United States and adopt a Western diet see their cardiovascular risk start climbing within a single generation. Within their children's lifetimes, their heart disease rates begin to match those of their American neighbors. So, whatever protection Japanese people carry into old age, and many of them live well into their 90s with arteries that look younger than their actual age, they are carrying it in their food, not in their chromosomes. And that raises an obvious question, doesn't it? What exactly are they eating? Because I think most people in the Western world, if they were asked to guess, would say, oh, it's the fish, or the green tea, or the small portions. And those things matter. But there is one food, one specific, ancient, fermented food that keeps appearing in the cardiovascular research literature with a consistency that genuinely surprised me the first time I came across it. And by the end of this video, I want you to understand exactly what it is, how it works, and how you can realistically incorporate it into your life starting this week. I'm Dr. Steve Collins, and on this channel, I translate real science into conversations you can actually use. Subscribe if you haven't already. This kind of content is exactly what we do here. Now, before we get into the food itself, let me give you a little context, because I think it matters. A lot of you will be wondering, isn't Japan's health advantage just about lower obesity rates, less processed food, more walking? And yes, all of those things contribute. But there are specific dietary elements in the traditional Japanese pattern that researchers have been chasing for decades. And one of them, probably the most underappreciated one in Western health conversations, is a food called natto. Natto. If you've never come across it, let me paint you a picture. It's fermented soybeans. It's slimy, stringy, dark brown, and it smells like a combination of old cheese and a very committed gym bag. Japanese people eat it for breakfast, often on rice, sometimes with a raw egg cracked on top and a splash of soy sauce. The first time I came across natto in the research literature, I filed it away as interesting. The second time, I thought there might really be something here. By the fifth or sixth time, I became convinced this food deserves a proper, serious conversation. So here we are. So what is actually going on inside your body when you eat this food? Stay with me because this matters. When soybeans are fermented using a bacterium called Bacillus subtilis natto, they produce a very specific enzyme. That enzyme is called Nattokinase. And Nattokinase does something quite extraordinary once it enters your bloodstream. It breaks down fibrin. Now, what is fibrin? Fibrin is the protein scaffolding that blood clots are built around. Think of it like the steel rebar inside a concrete structure. Without the rebar, the concrete has no shape, no strength. It falls apart. Fibrin is the rebar of a blood clot. And blood clots, when they form in the wrong place, inside a coronary artery, for example, are what cause heart attacks and strokes. Here's the thing. Nattokinase doesn't just slow down new clots from forming. It actively helps dissolve existing fibrin, which, if you think about it, is actually quite remarkable, because most of the medications we use in hospital cardiology to dissolve clots have to be given intravenously under monitored conditions. And here is a fermented soybean performing a directionally similar job, quietly, from your breakfast bowl. There was a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial published in Scientific Reports. That's about as rigorous as nutrition research gets, where participants received either nattokinase extract or a placebo daily for 2 months. The nattokinase group showed significant reductions in fibrinogen, factor VII, and factor VIII, all proteins that drive clot formation. The placebo group showed no change. Now, I'm not going to overstate the evidence here. This is one trial. We need longer-term data. But when you combine findings like these with the broader epidemiological picture in Japan, a population eating natto regularly for centuries, a story starts to emerge that is genuinely hard to dismiss. The practical tip here is direct. If you can find natto, and it's increasingly available in Asian supermarkets and some health food shops, try eating it 2 or 3 times a week. Start small. The texture and smell are absolutely an acquired taste. To be honest, a lot of people need 3 or 4 attempts before they warm to it. Serve it on rice with a little soy sauce and Japanese mustard. That's the traditional way. If you genuinely cannot get there, nattokinase supplements exist. Though, as always, talk to your doctor first, especially if you're on anticoagulant medication. Right then. But natto is not a one-trick food. And this is where the story gets even more interesting. Natto is also the highest known dietary source of vitamin K2, specifically a form called MK7. And vitamin K2 is a nutrient that a significant proportion of people living on Western diets are chronically low in, simply because we don't ferment our foods the way traditional cultures have done for generations. Now, most people have a vague awareness of vitamin K and associate it with blood clotting. But K2 is doing something very different. K2 activates a protein called matrix Glay protein, which functions essentially as a traffic warden for calcium in your body. Its job is to prevent calcium from accumulating inside your arterial walls and redirect it into your bones and teeth where it is actually needed. Here's how I'd explain the mechanism to a friend. Imagine your arteries are pipes running through a building. Over time, without the right maintenance, mineral deposits start building up on the inside of those pipes, calcium specifically. The pipes become narrower, stiffer, harder. The pressure in the system climbs. Eventually, something gives. That's arterial calcification, and it's one of the central mechanisms driving heart disease. Vitamin K2 is essentially the maintenance worker who keeps those calcium deposits from forming in the first place. When you frame it that way, it becomes obvious why a deficiency in K2 would carry long-term consequences. The Rotterdam study, a landmark prospective cohort study published in the Journal of Nutrition that followed nearly 4,800 adults for almost a decade, found that people in the highest quartile of vitamin K2 intake had a 57% lower risk of dying from heart disease and significantly less arterial calcification visible on imaging compared to those with the lowest intake, 57%, for a nutrient that barely features in Western dietary guidelines, which, if you think about it, is actually quite remarkable. Now, where do you get K2 if natto isn't for you? Certain aged hard cheeses, Gouda, Edam, Brie, contain meaningful amounts. So do egg yolks from pasture-raised hens. Grass-fed butter has some, but honestly, none of these come anywhere near the concentrations in natto. The MK7 form found in natto also has a much longer half-life in the bloodstream than the K2 forms found in dairy, which means it's more bioavailable and stays active longer. If you're serious about your K2 status, it's worth asking your doctor about getting it assessed and then making a deliberate food choice from there. Moving on. Because natto and K2 are fascinating, but Japan's cardiovascular advantage is genuinely a team effort. And this next piece is something even health-literate people often underestimate. Japan consumes more fish per person than almost any other nation on Earth. And we're not talking about processed fish products. We're talking about oily, cold water fish like mackerel, sardines, salmon, and yellowtail, eaten regularly, often daily, frequently raw, or very lightly cooked in ways that preserve the fats. And those fats, the omega-3 fatty acids EPA and DHA, have a relationship with the heart that is, by this point, one of the most consistently replicated findings in all of cardiovascular medicine. Here's the biology in plain terms. Your heart is an electrical organ. It generates its own rhythm through specialized muscle cells, and those cells are surrounded by membranes. Those membranes are literally made partly from the fats you eat. Omega-3 fats make those membranes more fluid, more electrically responsive, and less prone to the kind of erratic misfiring that can tip into arrhythmia, irregular heart rhythms, which are a major driver of sudden cardiac death. Beyond that, EPA and DHA reduce chronic inflammation in the arterial wall, lower triglyceride levels, and slow the formation of the fatty plaques associated with atherosclerosis. There was a trial called the JELIS study, the Japan EPA lipid intervention study, that enrolled over 18,000 patients with high cholesterol and looked at whether adding EPA to standard statin therapy reduced cardiovascular events. The EPA group showed a 19% reduction in major coronary events compared to the statin-only group. And remember, this was in a population already eating far more fish than the average Westerner. That 19% was on top of an already fish-rich diet, which tells you something important about the dose-response relationship here. The practical takeaway is to aim for 2 to 3 portions of oily fish per week. Mackerel, sardines, and anchovies are affordable, sustainable options. If fish genuinely doesn't work for your diet, a well-sourced omega-3 supplement providing meaningful amounts of EPA and DHA is a reasonable alternative. Though the whole food is always preferable because fish comes packaged with protein, selenium, iodine, and other cofactors that supplements simply cannot replicate. And if you're finding this useful, which I really hope you are, then please do hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It genuinely makes a difference to how many people this information reaches, and that is the entire reason I make these videos. Okay, so let's talk about something that receives far less attention than it deserves when people discuss Japan's longevity. Green tea, not as a trendy health product, not as an extract in a capsule, but as a daily ritual, multiple cups, often 5 or 6 throughout the day, that is deeply embedded in Japanese life in a way that most Westerners simply don't replicate. To be honest, when green tea started appearing in longevity research, I was initially skeptical. It seemed too gentle, too ordinary to be doing anything genuinely significant. But the evidence accumulated to a point where I think it would be intellectually dishonest to leave it out of this conversation. Green tea contains a class of antioxidants called catechins. The most potent of these is EGCG. epigallocatechin galate. EGCG has been shown to improve the function of the endothelium, the delicate cellular lining of your blood vessels, reduce oxidative stress within the arterial wall, and inhibit a process called LDL oxidation. Oxidized LDL is the specific form of cholesterol that gets taken up by arterial wall immune cells, triggering the inflammatory cascade that leads to atherosclerotic plaques. Blocking that oxidation step early in the process is a meaningful prevention strategy. There was a major prospective study published in JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, that followed over 40,000 Japanese adults for up to 11 years. Those who drank 5 or more cups of green tea per day had a 26% lower risk of cardiovascular mortality compared to people drinking less than 1 cup daily. I'm not going to overstate the evidence here. This is observational data, and green tea drinkers may have other healthy habits that partly explain the association. But the signal is consistent across multiple study designs and populations. 1 or 2 genuine cups a day is a reasonable, achievable starting point. Brew it properly. Water around 75 to 80 degrees Celsius, not boiling, which degrades the catechins, and drink it without milk, which has been shown to bind to catechins and reduce their bioavailability. Now here's something that surprised me when I first sat down with this research. Japan's traditional sodium consumption is actually quite high, historically higher than Western averages, and yet their blood pressure outcomes and cardiovascular mortality remain dramatically better. How? The answer lies partly in potassium. Japanese cuisine features seaweed, wakame, kombu, nori, alongside a wide variety of vegetables at almost every meal. These foods are extraordinarily rich in potassium, and potassium counteracts the effects of sodium in a very direct physiological way. It promotes sodium excretion through the kidneys, relaxes smooth muscle in the arterial walls, and helps preserve the elasticity of blood vessels. A comprehensive meta-analysis published in the British Medical Journal pooled data from 128 randomized trials and over 150 cohort studies and found that higher potassium intake was associated with meaningful reductions in systolic blood pressure, independently of sodium intake. What that means in practical terms is that potassium isn't just damage control for a high-salt diet. It has its own independent protective effect on your cardiovascular system. Seaweed is genuinely one of the most mineral-dense foods on the planet. A small serving of wakame, the kind you find in miso soup, delivers potassium, magnesium, iodine, and calcium in concentrations that most land vegetables can't match. There's a reason miso soup with seaweed is not just a Japanese breakfast tradition, it's practically a cardiovascular protocol in a bowl. If seaweed seems inaccessible, the principle is still entirely achievable. Leafy greens, sweet potatoes, white beans, avocado, and bananas are all excellent sources of potassium. Most adults in Western countries are consuming less than half of the 3,500 milligrams per day that research consistently points to as protective. Stay with me because this matters, and I want to bring all of this together for you in a way that's genuinely usable. And here's the thing I find most compelling about the traditional Japanese dietary pattern. It is not built around deprivation. It's not a diet in the modern sense of the word. It's built around thoughtful addition, adding fermented foods, adding oily fish, adding green tea, adding seaweed, adding mineral-rich vegetables. There's also a principle called hara hachibu, practiced particularly in Okinawa, one of the world's original blue zones, which translates roughly as eating until you're 80% full. Not stuffed, not completely satisfied, mostly full, and then stopping. And while that sounds almost too simple, the biology behind it is quite specific. Consistently overeating drives repeated cycles of postprandial inflammation, the spike in inflammatory markers that follows a large, calorie-dense meal. Over decades, that chronic low-grade inflammation accelerates arterial damage in ways that compound quietly and then become impossible to ignore. What we're looking at, honestly, is the cumulative effect of small, consistent choices across a lifetime. And the remarkable thing is that the science is telling us those choices are available to all of us right now, wherever we live. Pick one thing from today. Try natto twice this week, even once, even a small amount. Swap one meal to include oily fish. Start brewing 1 proper cup of green tea each morning. Put slightly less on your plate at dinner and wait before reaching for more. Add seaweed or leafy greens to a meal you're already making. None of these changes are dramatic. None of them require an overhaul of your life. But the people making these choices every single day are living longer, with healthier hearts and clearer arteries. And the evidence for that is now substantial. That to me is worth talking about. Thank you so much for watching this one. Genuinely, this is a topic I find endlessly fascinating, and I hope some of that came through in the last few minutes. If it was useful to you, and I really hope it was, please do hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and share this with someone you care about. Heart disease touches almost every family, and this kind of evidence-based information should be reaching as many people as possible. I've done a full video on the Okinawan diet and the specific lifestyle practices of the world's longest-lived populations. Have a search around the channel if you want to go deeper on any of this. I'll be back next week with something equally important. Take care of yourselves. See you then.